Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars through the wide window. After 100 years of traveling through space, his ship had finally reached the edge of known space where other alien races lived. Jake was a tall man with brown hair and calm eyes. He had led his crew of 47 humans on this long journey to find their place among the stars. Again, the ship moved slowly toward a large space station that belonged to the Zephyrian Trade Consortium. These aliens looked like tall gray beings, with 4 arms and coal black eyes. Jake had read old stories about how humans once lived peacefully with many alien races long ago. His grandfather had told him tales of brave humans who helped others and fought for what was right. Jake hoped those days could return. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan walked up to Jake. She was a smart woman with red hair who had been his second in command for many years. Amy pointed to the screen that showed the alien station ahead. The station was huge and covered in dark metal with sharp edges. It looked unfriendly and cold. Amy said the aliens had sent them a message saying humans were not welcome without paying heavy taxes. Jake felt confused because the old stories said aliens and humans used to be friends. He told his crew to be careful but friendly. The communications officer Greg Mitchell tried to talk to the aliens again. Greg was a young man who was good with languages. He spoke slowly and clearly to the alien controllers. The aliens answered in harsh voices saying humans must pay money or leave immediately while Greg talked to the aliens. Another crew member named Pete Johnson picked up a distress signal. Pete was the ship's engineer and he was very good at finding problems with machines. He told Jake that a civilian transport ship was being attacked by raiders near a small moon. The ship had families on board and they were calling for help. Pete said the attackers were using Zephyrian weapons. Jake looked at Amy and then at his crew. Everyone was waiting to see what he would do. The smart choice would be to ignore the distress call and focus on getting permission to dock at the station. Getting involved in a fight would make the aliens angry and could put his own people in danger. But Jake remembered the stories his grandfather told him about doing what was right even when it was hard. Amy understood what Jake was thinking. She nodded and told the crew to prepare for combat. The New Horizon turned away from the station and headed toward the location of the attack. Jake knew this decision might cause problems, but he could not let innocent people die when he had the power to help them. The New Horizon arrived at the small moon and found 3 raider ships attacking a large transport. The transport ship was damaged and leaking air into space. Jake could see small escape pods floating nearby with families inside. The raiders were Zephyrian ships with heavy weapons. They were demanding that the transport give them all their cargo and passengers. Jake ordered his weapons officer, Ryan Clark, to target the raider ships. Ryan was a former soldier who had trained for many years. He was careful to aim only at the raider engines and weapons. Jake did not want to kill anyone if he could avoid it. The New Horizon fired precise shots that disabled 2 of the raider ships quickly. The 3rd raider ship tried to escape, but Pete had already tracked its engine signature. The raiders sent a message asking why humans were interfering in Zephyrian business. Jake answered that protecting innocent people was everyone's business. The raider captain seemed confused by this answer and asked what payment Jake wanted for his help. Jake told the raider that he wanted no payment except for them to leave the transport alone. This answer made the raider captain even more confused. The raider asked if Jake was trying to trick him or if this was some kind of human strategy. Jake simply said he was doing what was right and the raiders should do the same. The raiders finally left, and Jake's crew helped repair the damaged transport. The passengers were aliens called Kellerians who looked like tall blue beings with large eyes. They were families traveling to a new world to start better lives. The Kellerian captain was an old female named Vera who had lived for many years. Vera thanked Jake many times, but she also seemed confused. She asked why humans had risked their lives for strangers without asking for anything in return. She said this kind of behavior was very rare in the galaxy now. Most beings only helped others if they could get something valuable back. Jake explained that helping others was just the right thing to do. Vera stared at him for a long time and then said something that surprised him. She said Jake reminded her of old stories her grandmother used to tell about legendary warriors who once protected a week across the galaxy. These warriors were called Knights of the Void, and they had disappeared long ago. Amy asked Vera to tell them more about these knights. Vera said the stories were probably just myths, but they described beings who fought for honor and justice without caring about rewards. The knights were said to be brave and kind, and they taught other races about courage and sacrifice. Vera said, most people had forgotten these stories because such behavior seemed impossible now. When the New Horizon finally returned to the Zephyrian station, the aliens were very angry. They had heard about the fight with the raiders, and they demanded to know why humans had interfered. Jake explained that he was protecting innocent lives, but the alien commander said this was not human business. The alien commander was a large Zephyrian with scars on his gray skin. He told Jake that the galaxy worked on simple rules now. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak learned to survive by being useful to the strong. Honor and justice were words that meant nothing in the real world. Jake felt sad hearing these words because they were so different from the stories he had grown up with. He realized that the galaxy had changed in the 100 years since humans had last traveled among the stars. The other races had forgotten how to be kind and brave. They had learned to think only about themselves and their own survival. As the New Horizon prepared to leave the station without getting the supplies they needed, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He decided that humans would have to remind the galaxy what it meant to be honorable again. News about the human ship spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. Every alien race heard about how humans had risked their lives to save strangers without asking for payment. Most aliens did not understand this behavior, and many thought it was some kind of trick. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium sent warnings to all their stations saying humans were dangerous, and unpredictable Captain Jake Morrison tried to dock at 7 different stations over the next month, but each time the aliens refused to help them. Some aliens demanded huge payments for basic supplies like food and fuel. Others simply told the humans to leave immediately. Commander Lisa Thompson kept records of every encounter, and she noticed that aliens seemed afraid of human kindness. More than human weapons, Lisa was a tough woman who had been a soldier before joining Jake's crew. She understood military tactics and enemy behavior, but alien fear of kindness made no sense to her. During their travels, the crew met many different alien races, including the crystal-skinned Vortheka and the insect-like Hirani. All of them reacted the same way when humans offered help without expecting anything back. The turning point came when engineer Pete Johnson was working on repairs with some of the Shalarian refugees who had stayed on the New Horizon. The Calarians had nowhere else to go because their transport was too damaged to continue the journey. Pete was helping an old Calarian mechanic named Dex fix their life support systems when Dex mentioned an ancient book his family had kept. For generations, Dex brought the book to Pete and explained that it contained old stories his people used to tell their children. The book was made of thin metal sheets covered in Calarian writing. Pete could not read the language, but he asked Dr. Karen White to help translate it. Karen was the ship's expert on alien cultures and languages. She had studied dozens of different alien civilizations. Karen spent 3 days working on the translation. With help from Dex and his family, what she found made her very excited. The book contained detailed stories about legendary warriors who had once traveled between the stars protecting innocent people. These warriors were called Knights of the Void, and the descriptions of their behavior matched exactly what humans had been doing. The knights in the stories were described as beings who valued honor above their own lives. They would risk everything to protect strangers, and they never asked for rewards. The knights taught other races about courage, sacrifice, and doing what was right even when it was difficult. The story said these knights had come from a distant star system and had disappeared mysteriously long ago. Amy Sullivan read the translated stories with growing amazement. She called Jake to her quarters and showed him the passages that described the knights' code of behavior. The knights always tried to solve problems without violence when possible. They treated enemies with respect and gave them chances to surrender. They protected the weak and defended those who could not defend. themselves. Jake realized these stories were not myths but memories of real events. He asked Karen to search for similar legends among other alien races. Karen contacted alien scholars and historians through the galaxy's data networks. She pretended to be doing research for academic purposes so the aliens would be willing to help her over several weeks. Karen found fragments of similar stories in the histories of many different races. The Vorthak had legends about crystal guardians, who had taught them about honor. The Hirani told stories of star protectors who had shown them the value of working together. Every race had slightly different names, but the descriptions were always the same. Navigation officer Nicole Baker helped Karen map the locations mentioned in these stories. Nicole was excellent at reading star charts and finding patterns in data. She discovered that all the legends pointed to specific star systems and space routes. Many of these locations were now considered dangerous or forbidden by modern alien governments. The most interesting discovery was that all the stories mentioned the same time period. The Knights had been active across the galaxy for about 200 years, and then they had all vanished at the same time. Karen found references to a great war or catastrophe, but the details had been lost or deliberately erased from most historical records. Greg Mitchell intercepted some communications between alien governments that mentioned the human ship. The aliens were clearly worried about something, but they were using code words that were hard to understand. Greg worked with Karen to decode the messages, and what they found was disturbing. The alien leaders were afraid that humans might be connected to the ancient Knights. One decoded message from a Zephyrian commander said that if humans were really the descendants of the Knights, then everything would change. Another message from a Vorthak official mentioned ancient weapons and knowledge that must never be allowed to return. The aliens were not just confused by human behavior, they were terrified of what it might mean. Jake called a meeting with his senior officers to discuss what they had learned. The evidence strongly suggested that humans had once been part of a galaxy-wide organization of knights who had protected other races. Something had happened to destroy this organization, and now the alien governments were afraid that humans might try to rebuild. Itami pointed out that their actions so far had been exactly like the knights in the old stories. They had protected innocent people, shown mercy to enemies, and refused to take rewards for doing good deeds. Without realizing it, they had been following an ancient human tradition that their own ancestors might have started. Ryan Clark suggested that they should be more careful about how they acted around aliens. If the governments were afraid of them, then getting involved in more conflicts could be dangerous. But Jake disagreed with this idea. He said that if humans really were the inheritors of the knight tradition, then they had a responsibility to live up to it. Dr. Karen White made another important discovery when she found references to hidden bases and secret archives that the knights had left behind. The locations were described in code, but Nicole Baker was able to figure out that one of them was in the Meridian sector, only 3 days away from their current position. Jake decided they should investigate this location even though it might be dangerous. He felt that understanding their past was important for deciding their future. If humans really were connected to these legendary knights, then they needed to learn everything they could about what had happened and why the knights had disappeared. As the New Horizon changed course toward the Meridian sector, Jake thought about the responsibility he and his crew now carried. They were not just explorers anymore, but possibly the last remnants of something much greater. The galaxy had forgotten about honor and courage, but maybe humans could help them remember. The alien governments might be afraid of what humans represented, but Jake was not afraid of his heritage. If his ancestors had been knights who protected the innocent, then he would be proud to continue that tradition. The stars needed protectors again, and humans were ready to answer that call. The ancient station in the Meridian sector looked dead from the outside. It was a massive structure made of dark metal that drifted silently in space between 2 small moons. Captain Jake Morrison studied the station through his ship's sensors and saw that it had been abandoned for many years. There were no lights, no energy signatures, and no signs of life anywhere on the structure. Nicole Baker guided the New Horizon carefully toward the station's docking bay. The bay doors were sealed shut, but Pete Johnson managed to find an emergency override system that still worked. As the doors slowly opened, Jake could see that the interior was filled with dust and debris. The station had been built to house thousands of people, but now it was completely empty. Jake led a team of 6 people, including Amy Sullivan, Ryan Clark, and Dr. Karen White, onto the station. They wore spacesuits because the life support systems had failed long ago. Their lights cut through the darkness as they explored corridors that had not seen visitors for centuries. The architecture was strange because it seemed designed for many different types of beings. Karen pointed out that the doorways were different sizes and the control panels had multiple interface types. Some were clearly made for beings with hands, like humans, while others were designed for creatures with tentacles or claws. This suggested that many different alien races had lived and worked together on this station peacefully. As they moved deeper into the station, Ryan found evidence of a great battle. Blast marks on the walls, damaged bulkheads, and debris from destroyed weapons showed that the station's final days had been violent. But the damage was old and the corridors were clear, as if someone had cleaned up after the fighting was over. The team reached the station's central core, where they found something incredible. Behind a heavy blast door that Pete managed to cut open was a chamber filled with artifacts and data storage devices. The chamber had its own power source that was still working after all these years. Emergency lights came on as soon as they entered. In the center of the chamber stood a large holographic display that activated when Karen approached it. The display showed a star map of the entire galaxy with thousands of points marked in different colors. Each point represented a location where the ancient knights had established bases, outposts, or memorial sites. Jake stepped closer to examine the display and accidentally triggered a sensor that started playing a recorded message. The hologram of a human man appeared in front of them. He was wearing armor decorated with stars, and his face was sad but determined. The man spoke in an old form of English that was hard to understand at first. The recorded human identified himself as Sir William Grant, last commander of the Order of the Stellar Crown. William explained that he was making this recording as the final night strongholds fell to enemy forces. He said the Order had been betrayed by the very people they had sworn to protect, and now all the knights were being hunted down and killed. William's message revealed that the Order of the Stellar Crown had been humanity's greatest achievement. For over 200 years, human knights had traveled throughout the galaxy teaching other races about honor, courage, and justice. They had helped settle disputes, protected trade routes, and defended innocent people from pirates and tyrants, but the Order's success had made them enemies among those who profited from chaos and conflict. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium, several Vorthak noble houses, and corrupt officials from dozens of other races had formed a secret alliance to destroy the Knights. They spread lies saying the Knights were planning to conquer the galaxy and establish human rule over all other races. The alliance had struck without warning, attacking Knight bases simultaneously across the galaxy. Many Knights had been killed in their sleep or murdered while trying to protect civilians. The survivors had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and caught unprepared. One by one, all the Knight strongholds had fallen. William's message explained that he and the last few Knights were making their final stand at this station. They knew they would not survive, but they were determined to preserve the knowledge and ideals of the Order for future generations. Hidden throughout the galaxy were secret archives containing everything the Knights had learned about peace, justice, and cooperation between different races. Ryan Clark found a weapons locker that contained suits of armor and energy swords that had belonged to the last Knights. The weapons were still functional, and the armor was designed to protect the wearer while allowing them to move quickly and gracefully. Everything was built for defense rather than conquest, proving that the Knights really had been protectors rather than warriors. Amy discovered a library of data crystals containing the complete history of the Order. She learned that the Knights had established schools on hundreds of worlds where they taught alien children about human values. They had also created a network of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts that had brought peace to large sections of the galaxy. The most important discovery was a detailed record of how the Order had been organized. Knights were chosen not for their fighting skills, but for their character and commitment to helping others. They took vows to protect the innocent, defend the weak, and treat all beings with respect regardless of their species or background. Karen found evidence that many alien races had produced their own knights who served alongside the humans. The Order had never been exclusively human, but had welcomed anyone who shared their ideals. Kalarians, Vorthak, and even some Zephyrians had become knights and fought bravely to defend their principles. The final part of William's message was a plea to any humans who might find the archive in the future. He said that the galaxy needed the knights now more than ever. Without the Order's influence, the different races had become suspicious and hostile toward each other. Wars were becoming more common and innocent people were suffering. William had hidden a complete copy of the Knights' Code and training methods in this archive. He hoped that someday new knights would emerge to restore peace and justice to the stars. The message ended with William's final words as enemy forces broke through the station's defenses. He died fighting to protect the archive that Jake and his team had now discovered. Jake stood in silence for several minutes after the message ended. He felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on his shoulders. His ancestors had not just been explorers or traders, but had been the guardians of galactic civilization. The Order had fallen because of greed and fear, but its ideals had survived. Amy asked Jake what they should do with this knowledge. The archive contained enough information to restart the Order of the Stellar Crown, but that would make them targets of the same forces that had destroyed the original Knights. The alien governments were already suspicious of human activities, and discovering this history would terrify them. Jake looked around the chamber at the armor, weapons, and records of the fallen knights. He thought about William Grant's final message and the responsibility that had been passed down to them. The galaxy was still suffering from the same problems that had existed when the Order fell. Pirates attacked innocent traders, corrupt officials oppressed their people, and different races viewed each other with suspicion and hatred. Ryan suggested that they should keep this discovery secret and avoid drawing attention to themselves. But Jake disagreed. He said that hiding from their heritage would be a betrayal of everything the Knights had died for. If humans were truly the inheritors of the Order, then they had an obligation to continue its mission. Dr. Karen White pointed out that they were only 47 people, while the original Order had included thousands of knights from many different races. Rebuilding the Order would require finding allies among the alien races and convincing them to reject the corruption that now dominated the galaxy. Jake made his decision as he looked at the star map showing all the hidden knight archives scattered across the galaxy. They would visit as many of these sites as possible to gather more knowledge and equipment. Then they would begin the long process of inspiring a new generation of beings who were willing to fight for justice and honor the new horizon. Left the ancient station carrying the armor and weapons of the last knights, along with copies of their complete records. Jake knew that their journey had changed from a simple exploration mission into something much more important. They were no longer just humans returning to the galaxy, but the first members of a reborn Order of the Stellar Crown. The revelation of their ancient heritage changed everything for Captain Jake Morrison and his crew. As they traveled from one hidden archive to another, they found more evidence of the Knights' noble past and the corruption that had destroyed them. Each discovery made Jake more determined to restore the Order, but also more aware of the dangers they faced. 3 weeks after leaving the Meridian Station, the New Horizon was approached by a massive Zephyrian warship called the Dark Talon. The ship was twice the size of the New Horizon and carried enough weapons to destroy a small planet. Its commander was Overlord Vexstar, one of the most powerful leaders in the Zephyrian Trade Consortium. Vexstar sent a message demanding that Jake surrender his ship immediately. The Overlord had learned about the humans' discovery of the ancient archives, and he was determined to stop them from spreading the knowledge they had found. Vexstar said that the old Order was dead and anyone who tried to bring it back would be destroyed. Jake refused to surrender and ordered his crew to prepare for battle. But he knew they could not win a direct fight against the Dark Talon's superior firepower. Amy Sullivan suggested they try to escape using the New Horizons faster engines, but Jake had a different idea. He decided to use the ancient knight armor and weapons they had recovered. Ryan Clark and 5 other crew members put on the knight armor and armed themselves with energy swords and defensive shields. The armor was designed to protect them in space combat and allowed them to move between ships during battle. Jake's plan was to board the Dark Talon and capture Vexstar while the New Horizon kept the enemy ship distracted. The plan worked at first. While Pete Johnson piloted the New Horizon in evasive maneuvers, Jake and his boarding party crossed the space between the ships and cut through the Dark Talon's hull. The Zephyrian crew was not prepared for hand-to-hand combat, and the humans moved through the ship like the knights of old, but Vexstar had set a trap. As soon as the boarding party reached the command deck, blast doors sealed them inside, and the Overlord revealed that he had captured Greg Mitchell during the initial attack. Vexstar threatened to kill Greg unless Jake surrendered immediately and turned over all the Knight archives. Jake had no choice but to give up his weapons and allow himself to be captured. Vexstar was satisfied with his victory and ordered his forces to disable the New Horizon and capture the entire crew. The humans were separated and imprisoned on different worlds throughout Zephyrian space to prevent them from working together. Jake found himself in a cell on the prison moon of Zarian Prime, a harsh world where the Consortium kept its most dangerous enemies. The prison was built inside an asteroid and was considered escape-proof. Jake's cell was small and dark with only a tiny window that showed the stars outside. Amy Sullivan was taken to a research facility on another world where Zephyrian scientists wanted to study human psychology and learn why humans behave so differently from other races. Dr. Karen White was imprisoned at the same facility because the aliens wanted her knowledge of ancient history and archaeology. Ryan Clark and the other crew members were scattered across multiple prison colonies where they were forced to work in dangerous mines and factories. The Zephyrians hoped that hard labor and harsh conditions would break their spirit and make them give up their beliefs about honor and justice. But Vexstar made a crucial mistake when he allowed Greg Mitchell to broadcast one final message before capturing the New Horizon. Greg had managed to send a wide-spectrum transmission that reached every communication network in the galaxy. The message contained the complete story of the ancient order of the Stellar Crown and humanity's role in galactic history. The broadcast reached billions of beings across hundreds of worlds and caused an immediate sensation. Many aliens dismissed it as human propaganda, but others were deeply affected by what they heard. The message included recordings from the Knight archives showing how the Order had brought peace and prosperity to the galaxy. Young Kellerians who heard the broadcast remembered the old stories their grandparents had told them about legendary protectors. Some Vorthic historians quietly began researching their own forgotten legends and found references to the Crystal Guardians who had once served alongside the Knight Seven. Among the Zephyrians, there were individuals who questioned the Consortium's actions. A few junior officers on the Dark Talon had been disturbed by Vexstar's cruel treatment of the human prisoners and began to wonder if their leaders had been lying to them about the old. Ordering his prison cell, Jake could see the effects of Greg's broadcast through the small window. Prisoner ships arrived regularly carrying beings who had been arrested for talking about the Knights or questioning their government's authority. The alien leaders were clearly worried about the growing interest in the old stories. Dr. Karen White managed to continue her research even in captivity. The Zephyrian scientists who were studying her became interested in her knowledge of ancient history and provided her with access to their historical databases. Karen pretended to cooperate with their research while secretly gathering more evidence about the Knight Order. Karen discovered that many of the alien governments had deliberately destroyed records of the Knight era to hide their ancestors' betrayal. But some documents had survived in forgotten archives and private collections. The evidence showed that the galaxy had been much more peaceful and prosperous when the Knights were active. Meanwhile, Amy Sullivan used her natural leadership skills to organize resistance among the prisoners at her facility. She taught them about the Night Code and showed them how cooperation and mutual support were more effective than violence or selfishness. The guards were puzzled when fights between prisoners became rare and work efficiency improved. The most important development came from an unexpected source. A young Kellerian named Zaintar had heard Greg's broadcast and been inspired to learn more about the ancient knights. Zaintar gathered a group of like-minded individuals from different species, and they began calling themselves the New Knights of the Void. This new organization started small with only a dozen members, but it grew quickly as more beings heard about their mission to restore honor and justice to the galaxy. Unlike the original order, the New Knights had to operate in secret because their governments would arrest them if they were discovered. The New Knights were led by Zaintar, but they also included a reformed Zephyrian named Keshira, who had become disgusted with her people's cruelty and corruption. Keshira provided valuable intelligence about consortium operations and helped the New Knights plan rescue missions for political prisoners. Jake learned about the New Knights when a coded message was smuggled into his cell by a sympathetic guard. The message told him that allies were working to free him and his crew, but they needed time to prepare. Jake was amazed that his actions had inspired beings from other species to risk their lives for the Knight ideals. As months passed, Jake watched the galaxy change through his prison window. Protests and demonstrations became common on many worlds, as citizens demanded more honest government and fair treatment. The alien leaders responded with increased oppression, but this only made their people more determined to resist. Jake realized that the most important battle was not the military conflict between ships and weapons, but the war of ideas between corruption and honor. Greg's broadcast had planted seeds of hope in minds across the galaxy, and those seeds were growing into a movement that no amount of force could stop. The old order had fallen because it had been betrayed by those it trusted, but this new movement was different. It was being built by ordinary beings who had chosen to reject the cynicism and selfishness that dominated their societies. They were proving that the Knight ideals could inspire anyone regardless of their species or background. From his cell on Zarian Prime, Jake could see that their mission was succeeding even though he and his crew were prisoners. The galaxy was remembering what it meant to have honor and courage. Soon, the New Knights would be strong enough to challenge the corrupt systems that had ruled for so long. Jake prepared himself for the rescue he knew was coming and for the greater battles that lay ahead. The Order of the Stellar Crown would rise again, but this time it would be built on a foundation that could not be destroyed by betrayal or corruption. The rescue came during the darkest hour of the night cycle on Zarian Prime. Jake Morrison had been imprisoned for 8 months. When explosions rocked the asteroid prison and emergency alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Through his small window, Jake could see small ships attacking the prison's defense platforms with precise strikes that disabled rather than destroyed them. The cell door suddenly opened and a figure in modified knight armor stepped inside. Jake recognized the armor design from the ancient archives, but this version had been updated with modern technology. The rescuer removed their helmet to reveal a young Calarian female with the distinctive blue skin and large eyes of her species. She introduced herself as Zara, a member of the New Knights of the Void. Zara explained that their organization had spent months planning this rescue mission and had managed to infiltrate the prison staff with sympathetic guards. She handed Jake a suit of armor and weapons that had been crafted based on the ancient knight designs. As they moved through the prison corridors, Jake saw that the rescue operation was being carried out with the same principles that had guided the original knights. The New Knights were using non-lethal weapons when possible and were treating the prison guards with respect even while defeating them. Several guards who had been knocked unconscious were being given medical attentions. Ara led Jake to the prison's main transport bay, where he was reunited with Ryan Clark and 3 other crew members who had been held at the same facility. The other humans looked thin from months of poor food and hard labor, but their spirits remained strong. They quickly put on the armor that Zara's team provided. The leader of the rescue operation was Zaintar, the young Kellerian who had founded the New Knights of the Void after hearing Greg Mitchell's broadcast. Zaintar was tall and confident with the bearing of a natural leader. He told Jake that the new order now included over 300 members from 15 different species. Ainer explained that they had learned from the mistakes that led to the original order's destruction. Instead of establishing permanent bases that could be attacked, the new Knights operated from hidden mobile stations and safe houses. They also maintained strict security to prevent infiltration by enemy agents. The rescue fleet consisted of 6 small ships that had been modified for stealth and speed rather than heavy combat. Each ship was crewed by beings from different species working together in harmony. Jake noticed that the new Knights had adopted a modified version of the ancient code that emphasized cooperation between different races as they escaped from Zarian. Prime Xantar told Jake about the other rescue operations that were happening simultaneously across the galaxy. Amy Sullivan had already been freed from the research facility along with Dr. Karen White, and they were now helping to establish training centers for new recruits. The reformed Zephyrian named Kashira had proven invaluable in these operations. Her knowledge of consortium security procedures had allowed the new Knights to rescue dozens of political prisoners and gather intelligence about enemy plans. Kashira had also convinced several other Zephyrians to join their cause. Greg Mitchell had been rescued 2 months earlier and was now running a secret communication network that spread news of the New Order's activities across the galaxy. His broadcasts were inspiring more beings to reject the corruption of their governments and join the growing resistance movement. The new Knights had established their main base on a hidden space station in an uncharted nebula. The station had been built using resources donated by sympathetic merchants and engineers from many different worlds. Unlike the ancient order's military fortresses, this base was designed to be a center of learning and cooperation. When Jake arrived at the base, he was amazed by what he saw. The station housed training facilities, workshops, libraries, and living quarters for hundreds of beings. Humans worked alongside Kellerians, reformed Zephyrians, and members of species Jake had never seen before. Everyone was united by their commitment to the Knight ideals. Amy Sullivan met Jake at the docking bay and briefed him on everything that had happened during his imprisonment. The new order was growing rapidly, but it was also facing increasing pressure from the established governments. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium had allied with several other powers to hunt down and destroy the new Knights. Dr. Karen White showed Jake the progress she had made in recovering ancient Knight knowledge. The new order now had access to most of the original training methods, codes of conduct, and historical records. They had also improved on some of the ancient techniques by incorporating lessons learned from modern conflicts. The most significant development was the creation of a new Knight oath that had been adapted for the current situation. Instead of swearing loyalty to a single order, the new Knights pledged to work together across all species boundaries to protect the innocent and promote justice throughout the galaxy. Tony Martinez, the New Horizons medic, had become one of the most respected teachers at the base. Tony had developed training programs that taught new Knights how to provide medical aid and disaster relief. His gentle manner and dedication to helping others made him a perfect example of the Knight ideals. Pete Johnson had used his engineering skills to help design better armor and equipment for the new Knights. Pete's innovations had made the armor lighter and more protective while adding communication systems that allowed Knights to coordinate during missions. His work was helping the new order operate more effectively than their ancient predecessors. The new Knights had already completed several successful missions that proved their commitment to the original Knight principles. They had stopped pirate attacks, delivered aid to disaster victims, and helped negotiate peaceful solutions to border disputes. Each success brought more recruits to their cause, but Jake also learned that the new order faced serious challenges. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium was offering large rewards for information about Knight activities and had infiltrated some sympathetic organizations. Several new Knights had been captured or killed during recent missions. Overlord Vexstar had become obsessed with destroying the New Order and had convinced other alien leaders that the Knights represented an existential threat to their power. The Consortium was building a massive fleet specifically designed to hunt down Knight ships and destroy their hidden bases despite these dangers. Jake was impressed by the dedication and courage of the new knights. During his tour of the base, he met young beings who had given up comfortable lives to fight for justice and older individuals who had survived decades of oppression but still believed in the possibility of positive change. The most moving encounter was with a group of children from different species who were being taught about cooperation and mutual respect. These children represented the future that the new knights were fighting to create, a galaxy where different races could live together in peace and understanding. Jake realized that this new movement was already more successful than the original Order of the Stellar Crown in one crucial way. The ancient knights had been imposed from above by a small group of humans who convinced other races to adopt their values. The new knights were growing from below as ordinary beings chose to embrace those values for themselves. Asked Jake to accept the position of Grand Marshal of the new Knights of the Void, recognizing his role as the bridge between the ancient order and its modern resurrection. Jake accepted the honor but insisted that leadership should be shared among representatives of all the member species. As Jake looked out at the bustling activity on the space station, he felt hope for the first time since his imprisonment. The galaxy was changing as more beings rejected corruption and embraced the ideals of honor and justice. The new knights were proving that cooperation between species was not only possible, but more powerful than any single race could achieve. Alone, the final confrontation with the forces of corruption was approaching, but Jake was no longer worried about the outcome. The new order had something that their enemies could never understand or defeat. They had the willing support of beings who had chosen to fight for something greater than themselves. The final confrontation came not as the massive fleet battle that everyone expected, but as a personal challenge that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Overlord Vexstar had assembled the largest armada in Zephyrian history, combining consortium warships with vessels from allied governments that feared the growing influence of the new Knights of the Void. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the rebuilt New Horizon and watched the enemy fleet approach through hyperspace. The new Knight forces were outnumbered 10-1, but they had something their enemies lacked. Every ship in the Knight fleet was crewed by volunteers who believed in their cause, while many of the enemy crews were fighting only because they had. In order to do so, Zander contacted Jake from his flagship and suggested they try to avoid the battle through negotiation. The Kalarian leader believed that many of the enemy soldiers might be convinced to change sides if they understood what the Knights really stood for. But before Jake could respond, Vexstar's voice came over all communication channels. The Zephyrian overlord made an offer that surprised everyone. Instead of a fleet battle that would cost thousands of lives, Vexstar challenged Jake to single combat. If Jake won, the consortium would dissolve and free all the territories under their control. If Vexstar won, the new Knights would disband, and humanity would leave the galaxy forever. Amy Sullivan immediately protested that the challenge was obviously a trap. Vexstar was younger and stronger than Jake and had been trained in combat from childhood. The Overlord also had access to advanced weapons and armor that would give him every advantage in a personal duel, but Jake understood that this was about more than just winning or losing a fight. The entire galaxy was watching to see how the Knights would handle this situation. If he refused the challenge, it would suggest that the Knights were cowards who hid behind their ideals. When faced with real danger, Jake accepted the challenge, but he insisted on specific conditions. The duel would take place on a neutral space station where representatives from every major species could witness the outcome. Both fighters would use identical weapons and armor to ensure fairness. Most importantly, the duel would be broadcast across the galaxy so everyone could see the result. Karen White worked with engineers from multiple species to design the combat arena and establish the rules. The space station chosen for the duel was an ancient diplomatic facility that had been abandoned for decades. The arena was a simple circular platform surrounded by energy barriers to protect the spectators. On the day of the duel, representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to witness the event. The audience included government officials, military commanders, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had traveled great distances to see history being made. Many of the spectators had never seen humans and knights working together before. Vexstar arrived wearing elaborate armor decorated with the symbols of his victories over conquered worlds. The Zephyrian overlord was confident and aggressive, clearly expecting to win easily against a human he considered weak and naive. He brought an entourage of bodyguards and advisors who shared his contempt for the knight ideals. Jake entered the arena wearing simple knight armor that bore no decorations except the star symbol of the ancient order. He was accompanied only by Amy Sullivan and Ryan Clark, who would serve as his seconds during the preparation period. The contrast between the two fighters was obvious to everyone watching before the combat began. Both fighters were allowed to make statements explaining their positions. Vexstar spoke first and declared that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. He said the knights were fools who would bring chaos by encouraging the weak to challenge their betters. Jake's response was very different. He said that true strength came from protecting others and that honor was more valuable than power. He explained that the knights did not want to rule anyone but simply wanted to create a galaxy where all beings could live in peace and dignity. The duel began with Vexstar attacking aggressively, using his superior size and speed to try to overwhelm Jake quickly. The Zephyrian's fighting style was brutal and efficient, designed to kill opponents as quickly as possible. Jake defended himself carefully, using techniques he had learned from the ancient knight training records. As the fight continued, Jake began to demonstrate the principles he had spoken about. When Vexstar stumbled and left himself open to attack, Jake helped him regain his balance instead of taking advantage of the weakness. When the Overlord's weapon was damaged, Jake paused the fight until it could be repaired. These acts of mercy and fair play confused Vexstar and angered him at the same time. The Overlord had never encountered an opponent who treated combat as anything other than a struggle for survival. He began fighting more recklessly, trying to provoke Jake into abandoning his principles. Jake continued to fight defensively, always giving Vexstar opportunities to surrender with honor. He spoke quietly to the Overlord during breaks in the action, explaining that they did not have to be enemies, and that the Consortium could change its ways without admitting defeat. The turning point came when Vexstar managed to wound Jake seriously with a lucky strike that penetrated his armor. The Overlord raised his weapon for a killing blow, but stopped when he saw that Jake was not trying to defend himself. Instead, Jake was looking directly into Vexstar's eyes with an expression of compassion rather than fear. In that moment, Vexstar saw something he had never experienced before. Jake was willing to die rather than betray his principles, but he was not angry or hateful toward the person who was about to kill him. The human actually seemed to feel sorry for what Vexstar had become through years of violence and corruption. The Overlord's weapon trembled in his hands as he struggled with emotions he did not understand. Around the arena, the spectators watched in complete silence as they witnessed something unprecedented. A warrior was choosing mercy over victory and compassion over revenge. Vexstar slowly lowered his weapon and stepped back from Jake. The Overlord's voice was barely audible as he admitted defeat and agreed to honor the terms of their agreement. He said that Jake had shown him what real strength looked like and that the knights deserved to rebuild their order. The audience erupted in cheers, and many beings who had been skeptical about the knight movement found themselves inspired by what they had witnessed. The broadcast of the duel reached every corner of the galaxy and convinced millions of viewers that the knights represented something genuinely different. Amy Sullivan helped Jake to the medical station where Tony Martinez treated his wounds. Jake was weak from blood loss, but he was more concerned about making sure Vexstar was treated with respect despite his surrender. The human insisted that the former Overlord should be offered a chance at redemption rather than punishment. Over the following weeks, the promises made during the duel were kept. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium dissolved and its territories were reorganized as independent systems with democratic governments. Many former consortium officials accepted positions in the new administrations while others chose to join the reformed Knight Order. Kashira played a crucial role in the peaceful transition by convincing other Zephyrians that cooperation was more profitable than exploitation. The reformed government systems quickly became more prosperous and stable than they had been under consortium rule. The success of the duel inspired similar changes throughout the galaxy. Corrupt governments fell as their citizens demanded better leadership. Species that had been enemies for generations began working together on trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Jake and his crew became the founding members of the new Order of the Stellar Crown, but this version was very different from its ancient predecessor. Leadership was shared among representatives from all member species, and decisions were made by consensus rather than decree. The new order established training centers on dozens of worlds, where beings from different species could learn to work together. The curriculum included not only combat skills but also diplomacy, disaster relief, engineering, medicine, and conflict resolution. Nicole Baker was put in charge of mapping and exploring the ancient night archives that were still hidden throughout the galaxy. Each discovery added to their understanding of how the original order had operated and what lessons could be applied to modern challenges. Greg Mitchell continued running the communication network that kept night chapters in contact across the galaxy. His broadcasts now included educational programs that taught alien children about cooperation and mutual respect between different species. Dr. Karen White established a university on the main night base where scholars from many worlds could study together and share knowledge. The university became a symbol of how different races could achieve more by working together than by competing against each other. As Amy Sullivan piloted the New Horizon toward their first official mission as the New Order's flagship, she reflected on how much had changed since they first emerged from hyperspace months ago. The galaxy was still vast and full of challenges, but it was no longer cold and hostile. Pirates and tyrants still existed, but now they faced organized opposition from beings who were willing to risk their lives to protect the innocent.